Be me, Andy, just a regular software dev trying to climb the corporate ladder. Work at a mid-sized tech company. The pay is decent, the work is interesting enough. The office culture was pretty standard, a lot of guys in the engineering and IT departments, so there was a lot of banter about video games, sports, and whatever new gadget was coming out. It was a functional workplace. We got stuff done. If a server crashed, you'd have 3 or 4 guys huddled around a monitor, shouting ideas and fixing it in minutes. It was loud, a bit chaotic, but efficient. Our lead engineer is this guy, Paul. He's probably been coding since before I was born. Quiet dude, doesn't say much, but when he does, everyone listens. He's the unspoken leader of the entire tech floor. He doesn't manage people, but he commands respect just by being the best at what he does. The CEO is Mr. Sanders, a typical numbers guy. As long as the productivity metrics are green and the clients are happy, he doesn't care what happens on the floors. He shows up for the big quarterly meetings, says some corporate stuff, and disappears back into his office. So, things were fine. We had a good rhythm. We worked hard. We joked around. We went home. Then she arrived. Her name was Soraya, the new head of HR. She was hired from some trendy startup on the coast, and she brought the whole vibe with her. The first email we got from her was an introduction, full of buzzwords like synergy, paradigm shift, and fostering inclusive dialogues. My first thought was, great, another one. In her first week, she didn't talk to any of the men in the tech departments, not a single one. Instead, she held a series of listening sessions exclusively for the female employees. We could see them through the glass walls of the conference rooms. Soraya would be at the head of the table, nodding with this incredibly serious expression, while some of the women talked. A few of the guys joked about it, saying she was probably setting up a secret club. Nobody took it seriously. We just thought it was some weird HR icebreaker thing. But after those sessions, the atmosphere started to change. Some of the female colleagues who we'd been friendly with for years started acting distant. The easygoing chat in the break room got quieter. If a group of guys were talking and a woman walked in, the conversation would just kind of die. It felt like we were suddenly walking on eggshells. About a month into her tenure, the email landed in everyone's inbox. Subject: Mandatory all-hands meeting, a new initiative for workplace equity. The meeting was in the main auditorium. The seating arrangement was telling. Almost all the women sat on one side of the aisle, and the men sat on the other. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Soraya walked onto the stage with a PowerPoint presentation and a huge smile. She started talking about her findings from her first month at the company. She said the workplace was dominated by an overpowering masculine energy. She used phrases like unconscious conversational dominance and paternalistic communication patterns. I looked over at Paul. He was just sitting there, arms crossed, with a completely blank expression. Impossible to know what he was thinking. Soraya clicked to the next slide. It had a picture of a megaphone with a universal male symbol in front of it, crossed out in red. She announced her big idea, a way to recalibrate our conversational ecosystem. She called it the 7-Day Male Silence Initiative. The room was dead quiet. You could hear someone's phone vibrate from across the auditorium. The rule was simple, she explained. For one full work week, Monday to Friday, men would not be allowed to speak. Not in meetings, not in the hallways, not at their desks, not in the break room. All communication from male employees had to be done through official written channels, email, or the internal project management ticketing system. The stated goal was to create a vacuum of silence that would empower female voices to rise and fill the space, fostering new leadership and collaborative opportunities. A few of the women on the other side of the aisle were nodding enthusiastically. I felt a knot in my stomach. I'm ambitious. I wanted a promotion. How am I supposed to show my value if I can't even talk? Someone in the back, one of the older hardware guys, actually laughed out loud. Soraya glared in his direction and said, "This is not a joke. This is a sanctioned mandatory company policy." She then introduced Mr. Sanders, who walked up to the microphone. He looked like he'd just been briefed on the idea 5 minutes before the meeting. He cleared his throat and said something like, "We support our HR department's innovative strategies to enhance our team dynamics. Let's all give this a try with a positive attitude." Then he walked off the stage. He had just signed off on it without a single thought about the consequences. The meeting ended. We all filed out in a state of shock. The walk back to our desks was the quietest I'd ever heard it. No one knew what to say. Once we were back in our department, the private group chat for the tech guys absolutely exploded. Messages were flying. "This is insane. Can they even do this? Is this legal? I'm just going to talk anyway. What are they going to do? Fire all of us?" I typed out a message myself. "Guys, this is career suicide. We have to push back. We should just ignore it. There's no way they can enforce this." The chat was a chaotic mess of anger and confusion for about 10 minutes. Then a single message appeared from Paul. It was the only thing he'd written in the chat all day. "No, we are going to follow the rule, to the letter." The chat immediately went silent. Everyone understood. The tone was set. We weren't going to fight it. We were going to comply, maliciously. That weekend was tense. I kept thinking about it. How was this even going to work? Our entire workflow was based on quick, informal communication. Monday morning arrived. I walked into the office, and the silence was the first thing that hit me. It was heavy, unnatural. Usually the office is buzzing with the sounds of people catching up after the weekend. Not today. I walked past the front desk. The receptionist, a woman, said, "Good morning, Andy?" I looked at her, gave a polite nod, and kept walking. Her smile faltered for a second. I got to my desk. A few of the other guys were already there, silently working. We just exchanged nods, no words. Soraya was walking around the office with a clipboard and a triumphant smile, like a general surveying her victory. She seemed to think this was a huge success. The first test came about an hour into the day. A female colleague from the marketing department came over to my desk. She needed some data for her report she was writing. Normally, I'd ask a few clarifying questions, and then I'd pull the data for her in 5 minutes. She started explaining what she needed. "Hey, Andy, I need the user engagement stats for the new feature from last quarter." I held up a hand to stop her. I looked her in the eyes, then slowly turned to my monitor. I opened my email client, composed a new message to her, and wrote, "Please submit all data requests via the official ticketing system as per the new communication policy. Be sure to include the specific date ranges and metrics required." I hit send. Her phone buzzed in her hand a second later. She looked at her phone, then back at me, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. I just stared back, my face a neutral mask. She huffed and walked back to her desk. 10 minutes later, a new ticket appeared in my queue. It was from her. It was vague and didn't have all the information I needed. So, I updated the ticket with a comment. "This request is unclear. Please specify the exact metrics you are tracking. Engagement is not a defined metric. Do you mean daily active users, session duration, click-through rate, or something else?" And I put the ticket in the awaiting feedback status. It was now back on her to figure it out. This little scene played out across the department all day. Men sitting in complete silence, communicating only through meticulously worded formal text. By lunchtime, the novelty had worn off for the women, and the frustration was starting to set in. The break room was segregated, women on one side talking quietly, men on the other side eating in total silence, just scrolling on their phones. Soraya came in during lunch, looked around, and gave this big, beaming smile. "Doesn't this feel more peaceful, more mindful?" she said to the room. No one answered her. The afternoon was even worse. A minor server hiccup occurred. It was a simple fix, something that required rebooting a process. Paul saw the alert. Normally, he would have just yelled over the cubicle wall to a sysadmin, "Hey, can you bounce the primary app server?" And it would be done in 30 seconds. Instead, Paul calmly created a new high-priority ticket. App server process unresponsive. Requires restart. He assigned it to the head sysadmin. The sysadmin, who sat 20 feet away, got the notification. He couldn't just do it. That server restart required a manager's approval to be done during work hours. So he updated the ticket. Manager approval required. Please have the relevant project manager approve this ticket. The ticket then had to be reassigned to a female project manager. She was in a meeting. She didn't see the ticket for 45 minutes. During those 45 minutes, half of our customer-facing platform was down. When she finally saw it, she approved it with a one-word comment. Approved. The ticket went back to the sysadmin, who then restarted the server. A 30-second problem took almost an hour to solve. Soraya was completely oblivious. She sent out a company-wide email at the end of the day. Day 1 of our initiative was a fantastic success. Let's continue to embrace this new way of collaborating. I'm so proud of everyone for their commitment to creating a more equitable space. I read the email, looked over at Paul's desk, and saw him just staring at his screen. He slowly shook his head, once. Day 2 started with the same heavy silence, but now there was an undercurrent of panic. The project managers were all looking stressed. Their Gantt charts and timelines were not designed for a workflow that required a written ticket for every single human interaction. A daily stand-up meeting for one of the major projects was on my calendar. It was usually a quick 15-minute huddle where everyone gave their updates. I walked into the conference room. It was me, Paul, and 3 other male engineers, along with the female project manager and a female QA tester. The 6 men just sat there, silent, laptops open. The project manager looked around nervously. "Okay, team, let's get started. Andy, can you give us your update?" I looked at her, then started typing. All the men in the room started typing. The only sound was the clicking of keyboards. A minute later, she got 5 emails at the exact same time. Each one was a status update. Mine said, "Yesterday's tasks are complete. Today I am working on ticket X123. No blockers at this time." She had to read through each email, one by one. Then she looked at the QA tester. "Okay, any updates from QA?" The tester said, "Yeah, I found a bug in Andy's new feature. It's a bit complicated to explain. It's about how the API handles null values." The project manager looked at me. "Andy, did you get that?" I nodded. Then I started typing a new email to the QA tester. "Please log the bug in the tracking system with detailed steps to reproduce, along with any relevant error logs and screenshots. I cannot investigate without a formal bug report." The QA tester looked like she was about to explode. "I'm telling you what the bug is right now. Just look at it." I just pointed to my mouth and shook my head. Paul, sitting next to me, didn't even look up from his laptop. He was typing something. The project manager sighed in defeat. "Okay, this meeting is over." A 15-minute meeting had turned into a 30-minute exercise in frustration that accomplished nothing. Later that day, the big one happened. There was a critical issue with our main database. It wasn't down, but performance was degrading rapidly. Everything was slowing to a crawl. This was an all-hands-on-deck situation. Paul was the database guru. He was the only one who could probably figure it out quickly. A female department head rushed over to his desk. "Paul, the database is on fire. We need you." Paul looked up at her with his calm, neutral expression. He didn't move. He just sat there. She got more frantic. "Didn't you hear me? It's an emergency." Paul slowly raised his hand, pointed at his mouth, and then pointed at his computer screen. Her face went from panic to pure, undiluted rage. She stormed off. A minute later, a ticket appeared. The title was just, "Database is broken." In all caps. The description was, "Fix it now." Paul looked at the ticket. He typed a single comment. "Broken is not a technical diagnosis. Please provide performance metrics, error logs, and specify which nodes are experiencing latency. I cannot begin to investigate without actionable data." He then assigned the ticket a low priority because the request itself was low quality. The system was grinding to a halt. Customer complaints were starting to flood the support lines. The department head came back, this time with Soraya. Soraya looked at Paul. "Paul, I am authorizing you to speak in this emergency situation." Paul just stared at her. He didn't say a word. He just shook his head no. The rules were the rules. The policy she put in place had no exceptions for emergencies. He was just following orders. Soraya looked like she was short-circuiting. Her grand social experiment was crashing the entire company in real time. She looked at the department head, then back at Paul. She had no idea what to do. She had lost complete control. The rest of us just kept our heads down and pretended to be working, but we were all watching. It was a masterclass in passive resistance. Paul wasn't being insubordinate. He was being perfectly disastrously obedient. He continued to type comments into the ticket, asking for more and more specific data, which the non-technical department head had no idea how to provide. Each request was perfectly reasonable from a technical standpoint, but impossible to fulfill in the current crisis without verbal communication. The stalemate lasted for almost 2 hours. The company was effectively dead in the water. Finally, a different project manager, one who was a bit more tech-savvy, spent an hour gathering all the logs and data Paul had been asking for. She dumped it all into the ticket. Paul read it. 5 minutes later, he updated the ticket. The issue is a runaway query from the marketing analytics tool that was deployed this morning. It's creating a deadlock in the main transaction table. I have killed the query. The database should return to normal performance within the next 15 minutes. And just like that, it was over. He had fixed in 5 minutes a problem that had crippled the company for hours, all because of a rule that prevented him from talking. The relief in the office was palpable, but it was followed by a simmering anger, and it was all directed at one person. Soraya. She tried to do damage control. She walked over to Paul's desk. "Thank you for handling that, Paul. You see, our system works." Paul didn't even look up at her. He just kept typing. She stood there for an awkward moment, then retreated back to her office. The win she was trying to claim felt completely hollow, and everyone knew it. The silent treatment was no longer just a rule. It had become a weapon, and Paul had just shown everyone how effective it could be. By Wednesday, day 3, the office had transformed. The initial novelty and shock had curdled into a thick, miserable sludge of inefficiency. Every single task was now buried under a mountain of digital paperwork. A simple question like, "Have you committed the latest build yet?" which would have been a 2-second shout across the room, was now a formal ticket that sat in a queue. The project management boards were a sea of red and yellow flags. Tasks were blocked everywhere. The women, who had seemed so pleased on Monday, were now the most stressed people in the building. Their jobs, especially for the managers and coordinators, had become a nightmare of chasing digital paper trails. They were spending their entire days writing, clarifying, and approving tickets for things that used to be resolved with a quick chat. I saw one of the project managers, a woman who was normally super organized and cheerful, just staring at her screen with her head in her hands. Her queue had over 200 unread notifications. The silent solidarity of the men was absolute. We had developed a whole system of nonverbal communication: a slight nod, a raised eyebrow, a subtle gesture with a pen. We could coordinate basic things without ever making a sound. We were a silent, well-oiled machine in a sea of vocal chaos. Soraya's attempts to maintain morale were failing spectacularly. She tried to organize a women's leadership brainstorming lunch. From what I heard, it devolved into a complaint session where multiple female managers vented about how impossible it was to get anything done. The problem was, they couldn't directly blame the men. The men were following the rules perfectly, so they had to blame the process or the system without acknowledging who had created it. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Soraya kept walking the floors, offering encouraging smiles that were met with stressed-out glares. Her great social experiment was turning her into the most unpopular person in the office. On Thursday, day 4, the cracks started to show in the other side's unity. I was at my desk when a senior female manager came over. She was responsible for a huge, high-pressure project, and it was clearly falling apart. She leaned over my cubicle and whispered, "Andy, please, I know the rule, but can you just look at this one thing for me? It'll take you 2 minutes. I'll fill out the ticket later, I promise. Just help me out here." It was a test of my loyalty to the silent pact. I looked from her pleading face to Paul's desk. He wasn't looking at me, but I could feel his presence. I could feel the eyes of all the other guys in the department. I slowly shook my head no. Then I turned to my monitor and began typing an email to her. As per company policy, I can only accept work requests through the official ticketing system. Verbal requests cannot be processed. Her face fell. It was a mix of disappointment and anger. She whispered, "Unbelievable," and stormed away. She hadn't been trying to be a friend or a colleague. She had been trying to use a personal appeal to get me to break ranks for her benefit. The men had been accused of being a boys' club, but in that moment, it was the women who were trying to use back channels and exceptions to the rules they had championed. We were the ones being consistent and fair, applying the rule to everyone equally. Later that day, I overheard 2 female colleagues arguing in hushed, angry tones near the coffee machine. One was blaming the other for submitting a vague ticket that had cost her half a day of work. The other was firing back that she couldn't get a straight answer from anyone. The collaborative, supportive environment that Soraya had promised for them was a fantasy. In reality, the pressure was making them turn on each other. Soraya's vision was backfiring at every conceivable level. She thought that by silencing the men, the women would naturally form a cohesive, effective leadership group. Instead, she had just removed the informal social glue and the efficient communication that held the entire company together, leaving everyone, men and women, isolated and frustrated. The men were united in their silence. The women were divided by the chaos it created. Then came Friday, day 5, the day of the client demo. This was a huge deal, a demonstration of a new software module for our biggest client. A multi-million-dollar account was on the line. The demo was to be led by the female project manager who had tried to get me to break the silence the day before. The meeting was a video conference. In the room were the project manager, Soraya, to observe the success of her new initiative, me, and a couple of other key people. The clients were on the big screen. The project manager started the demo. She was visibly nervous. She walked them through the new features. For the first 10 minutes, everything went smoothly. She got to the final, most important feature, the one I had built. She clicked the button to execute the function, and nothing happened. The screen froze. Then a horribly ugly error message popped up, a critical, show-stopping bug. There was a dead silence on the conference call. The lead client on their end unmuted his mic. Is that supposed to happen? The project manager started to panic. She was stammering, that's just a minor glitch. Let me just... She looked at me with pure, desperate terror in her eyes. She knew I was the only person in that room who could possibly know what was wrong and how to fix it. Her mouth formed the silent word, help. I looked back at her, my face impassive. Then, I did my job, exactly as I had been instructed to do all week. I opened the bug tracking software. I began to slowly, methodically create a new bug report. I typed in the title, Critical Failure During Client Demo. I started writing out the steps to reproduce the error. 1. Navigate to the main dashboard. 2. Click on the Execute Analysis button. 3. Observe Error message. The client was getting impatient. So, can you fix it? We don't have all day. The project manager was sweating. Soraya, sitting next to her, looked like she had seen a ghost. Her face was ashen. Her grand initiative was publicly imploding in front of the company's most important client. I finished writing the bug report. I attached a screenshot of the error. Then I got to the priority field. Based on the formal workflow, all new bugs, unless they came with a C-level executive override, were logged as low priority, by default, to be triaged at the next sprint planning meeting, which was next week. I selected low priority and clicked submit. The project manager saw me do it. I saw the last bit of hope drain from her face. She turned back to the client and just fell apart. We're going to have to reschedule. I'm so sorry. The client was not happy. He said something curt about not being impressed and ended the call. The video feed went black. The project manager put her head down on the table, and I think she was crying. Soraya just sat there, frozen, staring at the blank screen. She looked utterly defeated. The public humiliation was complete. It was a direct consequence of her own policy. She had wanted to show how competent the women were when men were silent. Instead, she had engineered a situation that made her star project manager look completely helpless and incompetent in front of a major client. We walked out of the conference room in silence. The news of the failed demo spread through the office like wildfire. An hour later, Soraya sent out another company-wide email. This one had a very different tone. Subject: Clarification on Communication Policy. The email said that the Silence Initiative was a great learning experience, but that, in the interest of business agility, verbal communication was now permitted and encouraged for all critical and time-sensitive issues. She was trying to put the genie back in the bottle. She was trying to quietly end the experiment before any more damage was done. But it was too late. We, the men, saw the email. We read it, and we collectively ignored it. A silent agreement passed through the department. We had received one official, mandatory order at an all-hands meeting. A vague email clarification did not supersede that. We were no longer just following her rule. We were enforcing it. The silence was ours now. We controlled it. Later that afternoon, Soraya came out of her office and walked directly to Paul's desk. She looked exhausted and desperate. "Paul," she said, her voice strained, "did you see my email? The policy is over. You can talk now. Please, tell your team to start talking again." Paul finished typing whatever he was working on. He slowly turned his head and looked at her. He didn't say a word. He just raised his right hand and pointed. He was pointing at the large poster she had proudly hung on the wall on Monday morning. It was a printout of her PowerPoint slide, the one with the crossed-out male symbol. In huge letters, it read, 7 days of male silence, let's listen. He pointed at the poster, then looked back at her and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug. The message was clear. You made this rule. We are following it until the 7 days are over. Soraya stared at him, then at her own poster. The look of utter powerlessness on her face was something I will never forget. She had created a prison of silence for us, and in doing so had trapped herself. She had the key, but she couldn't convince the prisoners to leave. She turned and walked back to her office, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. The final day of the work week was a formality. Nothing got done. The entire company was in a holding pattern, waiting for the week to end. Then came Monday, the beginning of a new week. Mr. Sanders was back from his business trip. He must have been greeted by a flood of panicked emails and voicemails. Around 10 a.m., he strode out of his corner office. He was not a happy man. His face was thunderous. "Conference room, now! Soraya, Paul! My office, now!" His voice boomed through the silent office. Soraya and Paul got up and followed him. We all watched them go. The rest of us just sat at our desks, waiting. About 15 minutes later, Soraya walked out of the conference room. She was walking fast, looking at the floor, holding a small cardboard box with her personal items. She didn't look at anyone. She went to her office, packed the rest of her things, and was escorted out of the building by security. It was a brutal, efficient corporate execution. Justice served. A few minutes after that, an email went out from Mr. Sanders to the entire company. Subject: return to normal operations. The email announced that Soraya was no longer with the company, effective immediately. It stated that all temporary communication policies were rescinded and that all employees were expected to collaborate freely and efficiently to meet our business objectives. Then Mr. Sanders walked out and stood in the middle of the tech department. He looked directly at Paul. "Paul, explain this to me. The whole week. What was this?" The entire office was silent, waiting for Paul's response. Paul stood up. He took a sip of his coffee. He looked at Mr. Sanders, then around at the rest of us. For the first time in a week, he spoke. His voice was calm and steady. "There's not much to explain, Mr. Sanders." He paused for a second. "We were told that our way of communicating was a problem. We were told that our voices were toxic and that they were holding the company back. We were given a direct, mandatory order from management to remove that problem. So we did. We removed our voices from the equation. We followed the policy you approved. We followed it exactly. We were perfect employees. And, as it turns out," he said, looking around the room, "that problem we were ordered to remove was the very thing that allowed this company to function. We aren't against anyone. We are against being treated as a problem that needs to be fixed." He took another sip of his coffee and sat back down. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't heavy or angry. It was a silence of understanding. Mr. Sanders stood there for a long moment, just processing what Paul had said. He finally nodded, a look of grim respect on his face. "All right, get back to work, everyone." And just like that, the sound returned to the office. Keyboards started clicking, phones started ringing, and voices started talking. A guy next to me immediately yelled over to the sysadmins about a server patch, and they yelled back. It was glorious. The tension that had built up all week just vanished. A few weeks passed. Things went back to normal, but it was a new normal. The company hired a new HR person, a quiet older guy who mostly kept to himself. But something had changed for the men in the company. We had been tested, and we hadn't broken. We had found a quiet strength and a unity we never knew we had. We had faced an absurd, unfair situation, and we had won, not by shouting or complaining, but by simply following the rules with perfect, logical precision. One morning, I was standing with Paul by the coffee machine. I joked, "I wonder what the new HR guy's big idea is going to be." Paul finished pouring his coffee. He looked at me with a very faint smile. "Probably someone who knows how to listen."